Welcome everyone to another episode of Policy Pod. Today we have a very special guest with us, Ms. Nayonika Basu, who is also a dear colleague from my ex organization, which is the Chief Minister's Good Governance Associates Program. And Nayonika is an engineer by training, and she has been working in this public policy and development sector for a while now. She currently is in the strategy implementation team with a health policy organization. And today we are here to learn from Neonica about what has been her journey in public policy sector been as a young professional, what made her switch from a corporate job to this, and are her future aspirations. Welcome, Neonica.
Thank you for having me, Ayush. I think it's been my pleasure, and I consider myself to be like a newly born baby in this sector. So I'm not sure if my insights would be quite useful, but I really hope it helps somebody who was, or rather, who is trying to, pave their path towards this sector from a different sector altogether. So yeah, just happy to be here, and thank you so much for, just having me and like treating me worthy enough for being a part of this wonderful, wonderful podcast that you have started. So, yeah.
Thanks. Now that the uh, branding and marketing aside, and all the praises that you have given us, we'll
No,
move forward from here. And I think, jump right in. While I've introduced the audience a little to what you have done in the past, we would love to know in your own words about what has been your journey like, what have you done in your career, and would also just love to know you as a person. So over to you, Nayonika.
sure, Ayush. So I'm an engineer by profession, and I've been a science student, happily a science student, not something that was forced upon me. So let me just clear that out loud. And there was no pressure as such from my family to pursue engineering. It's just something that I wanted to become at that point in time. But having said that, I think I always had that inclination towards the sector. And now that I look back in retrospect, I think it came very early on, and that was probably one of the reasons which I kept getting drawn towards the sector time and again, and I kept volunteering actively throughout school, college, and I knew I really enjoyed volunteering. My time with some or the other NGO, and mostly it would be on the education front because I just loved teaching and I loved spending time with children, especially children in in the need of care and protection. And interestingly enough, looking back, I think one of the first fundraisers that I actually did was back in when I was, I think, in third or fourth grade. The tsunami had hit, and our school had done this activity. And obviously, back then, I didn't really know what collective effort or what a fundraising activity was actually all about. But we were just told to like come back and collect whatever we could from wherever we stayed and lived in, basically. And I went around the society collecting like little amounts of money, and then it was more. I mean, I think from that point when I started realizing that just the amount of impact it causes if one person versus like a collective class collecting a pool of resources. So I think that really left a big impact in my childhood, and after that I just realized that every person can do something, whatever that person has the capability of, be it in whichever capacity, right? Like I'm sure I wouldn't have collected more than like what 1,000, 1,500 bucks that day, but the amount of money that all of us combined pooled in back in the day, I think was a significant amount of contribution that my class had made to the cause, right? And I think that was one of those very first instances, now that I look back, that kind of moved me and shaped me as a person. And yeah, my journey with volunteering sort of went ahead through and through, mostly in education, but then a little bit with the Robin Hood Army, where we used to just collect food parcels, leftover food parcels from like hotels and restaurants, and then also, sort of go distribute it to the needy. That happened for like 2 years, but largely in education, and I loved it thoroughly. But yeah, that's when I sort of thought that if I'm doing it part time, then what if I want to do this full time and explore it? And that's when the pivot happened.
That's wonderful to know. And when this pivot happened, you, I think, were working at Royal Enfield, right? uh, how was that experience? And like, I understand that this pivot happened gradually, but was there a inflection point of sorts where you actually thought, now is the time when I should probably move ahead from this particular job? And we would also love to know a little about the kind of work that you were doing at Royal Enfield before that.
Sure, sure. So I am basically a major in information technology. So basically, my studies were all in all about computer science. And at Royal Enfield, my role was to transform the processes, the supply chain processes, on a digital platform called SAP. So I think I was really intrigued by supply chain while I was studying. That was one of the electives, and for the uninitiated, supply chain processes is basically everything that goes from converting a raw material to a finished good. So, for me, as a graduate engineer trainee, that's what I joined Royal Enfield as right out of college. Having just seen the end to end process and having the chance to even digitize it on a platform which was as robust as a product that SAP is, I think that itself was a big opportunity. And I honestly really liked it. But I think at some point in time, like throughout the Royal Enfield journey as well, on every weekend, I would go to a shelter home thanks to this wonderful organization called Make a Difference. And
Yeah.
over the 2.5 years that I was volunteering with MAD every week, my sort of realization that, maybe I would want to venture out into this sector and really see what difference it can cause if I was spending full time, I mean, all of my efforts in that sector versus part time. Because while my job was good and I was satisfied, there was some part of me always wanting to venture out into this sector. And while there was no particular inflection point that, oh, this was that particular morning, I think it was a very gradual one, rather than
Sure.
a fixed day, so to say.
That's,
But yeah,
yeah.
yeah, that's and I think there was one more incident at Royal Enfield where I feel there was one particular CSR activity that had happened, which was a solar
Sure.
electrification project. Very interestingly, we were all on a 10-day Himalayan expedition, and that was to electrify a very remote village in Nubra Valley in Ladakh. And that was probably also a time where I had some time off from work at towards a social pursuit, and I just saw that there was just so much scope even in social entrepreneurship, because that business was a social enterprise. It is called Global Himalayan Expedition, and they were just helping corporates do better social impact, more meaningful social impact. And probably that was also one more incident which sort of triggered me to
Sure.
consider full
Sure.
time opportunities in the sector.
Sure.
Yeah.
When I look at your career journey, I think I also see you were a policy in action fellow with Vilac, and over the years, I have met and interacted with so many people who have considered Vilac to be that one another, like, entering space of sorts, the space which provides them exposure to policy sector in whichever way it does. Would How do you look back at that experience of Vilac? And probably could tell our audience a little bit about what Vilac is and how, like, what kind of opportunity it provides for an insight into the policy sector.
Sure. So I think this was back in 2019, about 2.5 years into the job, where I started exploring what are the
Yeah.
opportunities out there where I could get a better sense of which sector I'm trying to pivot into. So there were two choices, right? There are always two choices, that you can either
Yeah.
do like a full-time master's course and then figure out from there, like what opportunities are there. But thankfully, at my time back in 2019, there were platforms like Vilac which were giving you the part-time opportunity to kind of explore the space with your full-time commitments, be it in whichever sector. Uh, yeah, basically that. So I feel in that sense, Vilac just happened at the right time, because I started speaking to a lot of people who had done that with similar backgrounds, of course, like
Yeah.
engineers who were
Yeah.
wanting to venture out into this sector. So Vilac
And
is
what does Vilac
essentially,
entail,
yeah,
really?
Vilac is sorry.
What does Vilac entail? What are you
Right.
supposed to do?
So
Yeah.
VILAC is basically, it stands for Young Leaders for Active Citizenship, and as the name suggests, it is working towards increasing the participation of young people towards policy making, and then just building their capacities to like lead change. and it's really cool. It's like very short term, and it's a short term program. At least the program that I was a part of, that was a policy in action program, which really instills those very basic skills of how do you write a policy brief. But that's one of the activities that you're doing in the course of say 1.5 months, where you're meeting your peers who are from varied backgrounds, and then through a course of very structured classes, I would say, you get to know about the sector, especially for somebody who does not have any background in say policy making or basic political science or economics that you one needs to know, right, to just understand the sector better. I think it very nicely and gradually teaches you those basic concepts, and it's like a work in progress policy brief that you're working for an MP or an MLA, and sort of in the process also learning to implement the skills that you have learned over the period of time. So yeah, I think my program, I remember, was about how internet intermediaries. There was a lot of word and dialogue going along, how the government was looking at internet intermediaries,
Yeah.
and a lot of things going on around the data policy at that point in
Privacy.
time. So
Yeah.
data policy, data privacy,
Yeah.
and our policy brief was on that, and it was so relevant to the times that we were at that point in time. And given my background also was in technology, luckily enough, I felt that it was just the right fit. Yeah.
Wow, that's wonderful to know, and that's just great. And I think the first full time role that you did after Royal Enfield and getting exposed through MAD and Vilac is CMGGA. I think that's where we met, and I wouldn't have been able to tell that that was your first policy role, but since you did so wonderfully. But I think that's also one of the most sought after fellowships there are, the Chief Minister's Good Governance Associate Fellowship in Haryana. Would love to know what was your journey like. You were placed in the Gurugram district during the fellowship. How was it different than the other districts in Haryana, which are more rural? What were the lows and highs of your journey? And most importantly, what are the learnings when you reflect now? And how have you taken some of the learnings along with you in your career journey? That's a lot of questions, I know, but you
Yeah,
can
yeah.
choose to answer some of
I'm
them,
just
if
gonna
not
wrap
all.
my head around some of those, but yeah, no, I think CMGG happened at a very interesting period of time, because it was just COVID, if you would remember, like
Yeah.
2020
Yeah.
was the year that we all entered as
Yeah.
CMGJs, and everybody around me was cautioning me that nobody really knows what this pandemic is going to be all about, and you can easily do an online job because yours is a technical field, but you're choosing to like step out, go on the ground, and just be there with the administration at that point in time. But I think in retrospect, I think that was one of the best decisions, and the best time to be in the policy sector, I feel. But yeah, I think, like you mentioned, Gurugram as a district is probably the most developed district in the entire region of Haryana. I'm not sure if I'm being biased about it, but definitely I would say in a lot of aspects. But having said that, there's a lot of complexity as well, because while there are a lot of people who are doing significantly well, there are also a lot of migrant communities out there, and we all know what happened with the migrant communities back in
Yes.
2020. So I think just setting that thing, like we had about 14 or more bureaucrats. So every other district would have just one, or at max, like what, five bureaucrats in the district. But just the
Yeah.
scale at which Gurugram operated,
Yeah.
and the scale of operations, the complexities, you just needed so many officers, and even that sometimes felt like it's not enough, because there's just so many
Yeah.
things happening all the time, just by the
Yeah.
virtue of being closer to Delhi and Delhi
Yeah.
NCR largely. So I think, and then of course the entire COVID pandemic was just unfurling at that point in time. First wave lockdown was just very slowly started to be. I think we were just opening up when we had entered to
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
when we had entered our districts. So I think it was a very interesting period of time, because as CMGGs we had certain mandates that we were given from the CM's office, because there were like there are other focus areas
Yeah.
as well, right? We were working on Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao. We were working on women's safety. We were working on a lot of tech-based governance systems that we were hoping to
Yeah.
implement during the art period of time. And along with that, of course, COVID relief management was one of the major things as well.
Yeah.
So I think it has been a brilliant, I think, on the on ground experience, and I could have never asked for a better,
Yeah. Yeah.
stepping stone in this sector,
Yeah.
if not for a policy. I mean, if it, especially I feel if somebody is willing to explore the policy implementation side more than the research side, because of course one has to be
Mhm.
cognizant of the fact that there are two sides of public policy, right? One is the research side and one is the policy implementation side. So I was somewhat clear that I wanted to venture out the implementation space, and
Mhm.
fellowships like the CM's Fellowship of Haryana, I think, gives you one of like those experiences, especially because you're not like it's a policy already made and you're helping the
Mhm.
administration implement it. That's where your role is, and of course you can innovate to kind of fit into the context of the district, but it's mostly on the implementation lens, execution,
Mhm.
operations, much more than writing a policy brief or giving recommendations to the CM's
Mhm.
office. So so yeah, having said that, I think I maybe on the learnings part, as how
Mhm.
you were asking about some of the learnings that I had. I think one of the major learnings that I can truly attest, I think, after that 1 year was, true leadership has nothing to do with, like, the age or the position that a particular person is in. Because, and I say that because, like, there are just so many people at so many levels. And if you're somebody who understands their context, and you can show them a
Mhm.
collective vision and a path to achieving the prospective solution that you think is the right solution, then people, like, irrespective of which position you're at, irrespective of how
Mhm.
old or young you are, people will listen. And this is not me talking about what the role of a CMGGA has been in a district, but rather every government school teacher or every community worker who interacts with the community on a day-to-day basis, right? Like, they are leaders. They might not be the IS officers of the district, but they are the actual leaders who move things on a ground-to-ground basis, solve for things, and people listen to them much more than they do
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
you know like, yeah, to like other folks. So I think that was one of those very interesting, I would say, leadership experiences that I understood during the
Mhm.
period of that 1 year that I was there in the district. That
Yeah.
true leadership truly, does not, it has got nothing to do with age or the position or power.
Yeah.
Um, and I think the second thing that I think we also spoke about it a lot during
Mhm.
our tenure is just, in government especially, there is a lot of need for just institutionalizing a lot of things. Like, the institutional memory of the government systems is kind of a little person dependent. And if and I think it's a universal thing, right? Like, as long as you're able to create some continuity in any programs, irrespective of public or private sector, I think it should not be person dependent, because the sustainability and the long term impact that we're all looking
Mhm.
to create, I think that really gets hampered if it's a person dependent thing and it's not something ingrained in the institution.
Which is almost funny, given when we think of government, we think of all those paper files which should feed into that institutional memory. But I think the kind of experience you had with the governance intersection and having an insider's view tells you about the lacuna in the system to not have that institutional memory still after all that paperwork and all that procedures
Absolutely.
and everything. But yeah, yeah, I think that's the beauty of such fellowships and such programs, that they give you that insider's view.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. So, I mean, and it also helps you prevent just reinventing the wheel, right? Like,
Yeah.
there are certain things that always work on ground, instead of just reiterating the same thing with a new person coming in, tweaking it a little bit. How do you make whatever exists better, right? I think that
Yeah.
also sort of really helps. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that was another thing. And of course, like, one other thing that sort of comes down from the first point is just the importance of building capacities at all levels. This is something that from day one, that we have been told, but I think it's only with experience that you realize that
Yeah.
you only have 1 year, and you will go away, and so will a lot of other officers who are there in the district. But the people
Yeah.
who are the middle and the lower management people in the
Yeah.
government functionaries, they are going to be there probably for 40 years of
Yeah.
their career. So why don't you rather build capacities within them, or just help them understand what problems they are helping solve on a day-to-day basis,
Mhm.
and help just
Yeah.
help them being more efficient and more true to the cause that the government is sort of working for. So I think, yeah, I think these were some of my major learnings. I mean, I think I can go on this topic, but I think I'll just take a
Yeah.
pause. Yeah, yeah.
I can't agree more with what you have said, and I think I'm so glad that you got an experience like that. It really reflects in your voice how rich the experience was. But something you talked about earlier, and I would love to know how the work you did before and the academic training you had in information technology, were you able to bring some of that when you were a CMGGA? Or like, I'll probably, we'll also talk about your current role at Samhita for that, but like in terms of CMGJ, whether like creating some tech systems during the second wave of COVID or any other interventions, was it helpful any manner? This
Absolutely.
is
I
something
think,
also which
yeah.
also interests a lot of people coming from the corporate world and people who have been working in tech. When they enter public policy, to be able to just like bring that tech thinking and technology to the public policy world, which is a much needed thing anyway.
Right. No, no, I think absolutely. And I was just privileged in that sense that I was in Gurugram and not a district where, maybe acceptance of tech was not that high. In Gurugram, thankfully, the acceptance was there, the need was established. And I think if there was anything that helped through and through, throughout I mean, for us, all of us to, and I mean, get through the pandemic, it has been technology, right? And everybody has been upskilling themselves to just get better at it, if not
Yeah.
start. But then so yeah, I mean, even throughout my journey as a CMGJ, technological based interventions, be it within the public health sphere, and when I say, obviously, COVID relief management was one aspect of it, wherein every element of tracking that we were doing at a district level, right, be it screenings, or be it during the vaccination time, we were also planning a lot of supply chain related issues, that how much are we getting versus how many vaccines should we sort of disperse so making sure that every PHC has the right amount of vaccines catering to the right amount of crowd. So I think all of the tracking was extensively being done using tech in some form or the other. And my personal district initiative, as some of us know that we also work on a few pilot programs within the
Yeah.
district after having lived in the district for a few months, was on just building one very basic like tech platform within the mini secretariat, which is basically the place where the district
Mhm.
officials are based out of, and a lot of public comes there on a day-to-day basis. So I built like a mini system to just track everything that sort of comes in as a request, and then if there is any hardware or software required within the office building, then that gets catered to through that system. So I think, I mean, that was a very small initiative, but that's something which interested the CM's office,
Mhm.
and then it got really scaled up and
Yeah.
moved to other
Wow.
districts as well, to the other. And I think that was one of the happiest part, was that I think once that was something we built together with the Department of IT at the
Yeah.
state level, which is to
Yeah.
say that it was not something that I made it by myself, I coded it myself, but then just the idea and the understanding of tech made me pitch that concept, which they bought into, and then they built it so that they could use it. And I'm happy to say that they're still using it as we speak, as of today, regardless of the fact that me being there or not, they're still using it because they find value, because they have built it. It's not something that I have developed as a person and given to them as a product.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was just one small example, but I think technology was getting used at every part of my fellowship.
Mhm.
I think we were also implementing e-office, right, which was essentially a way to
Yeah.
make sure that there are no physical files, but every
Thanks.
department
Yeah.
is like getting on like on the digital platform, which was e-office. So just by making sure that we have an understanding at the back end of how the technology works, and then even creating it in a way that it's very user friendly, because you can't just create a product and give it to the government officials who are anyway not that tech savvy. But I think, given that I was in Gurugram, I think it was slightly easier for us than it would have been, say, for some a district like Sirsa, which is rural.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, like, I think there are lots of opportunities, and the opportunities are only going to grow for people who are wanting to move from a tech to social impact. Because when we're talking about
Sure.
scale and sustainability, like, tech is a great enabler. Of course, it can't do everything by itself, but I think tech is
Yeah,
a great enabler that one can leverage on to just reach out to the masses, given the
sure.
fact we are increasingly heading towards technology driven initiatives.
Sounds wonderful. Sounds wonderful, and I think something that I'm really interested in knowing about is how from CMGJ, which was a more implementation centric role, you went to Samhita and the kind of work you have been doing at Samhita, which is I believe a consulting firm, which works in health. We would love to know a little more about Samhita and the kind of work you have been doing for the past, I think, almost 1.5 years now at Samhita, and how has been your experience?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I think once the fellowship ends, I think all of us are in that question. I mean, we have the common question as to where we would want to like go next. So I think uh, being somebody who was very curious about what the entire sector had to offer,
Yeah,
or I would say just to enhance my understanding of what each of the players within the social sector was doing. I think I had a good understanding of of the government functioning through the CMGGA fellowship, but I probably did not understand the philanthropic institutions, the
yeah,
functioning of, I would say, social impact, quote unquote, social impact
yeah,
consulting firms as much before. And I think Samita that way gave me a very good experience, and it has been a really wonderful experience so far. And the work that we usually do is with corporates, foundations, multilateral and bilateral institutions, and of course governments, and non-profit organizations being a core part of it, because how do you scale without having any partnerships
yeah,
with government, right? So
yeah,
I think that way it has been a very interesting shift from a public sector lens to a private sector lens,
yeah,
if I were to say. And within Samhita also, I think from the last 1.5 years or so, we have been working towards a flagship program called Revive, which is essentially a blended finance facility which has been created in partnership with USAID, MSDF, OMIDEAR, to restore livelihoods lost during the pandemic. And we are continuing to work on the same. And the idea is to basically provide access to low cost capital or zero cost capital, and sort of layer it on with multiple other interventions such as social protection, access to healthcare, access to skilling for better market linkages. So I think all in all, it has been super interesting because my role within Samhita also has been focused on two primary areas. One, I think you mentioned, which is healthcare, and the other one is on social protection, which is essentially how do you make sure that every participant, we like to call our beneficiaries as participants, because we truly feel that you have to build some sense of accountability within them, and they are a part of the entire system as well, and not just beneficiaries. It's just one very slight shift that we like to always maintain in our conversations. But yeah, so our participant essentially are an integral part of the change that we're trying to envision, right? So we within the social protection that I work in, the idea is to facilitate government entitlements that a lot of people are often not aware of, that there are just so many schemes that exist out there, but the the people who they have been created for, oftentimes they don't have that amount of awareness, or even if they have the awareness, they don't have the capacity or the support required to actually get them. So obviously, with the help of all the non-profit organizations that we work with, and the corporates and the philanthropic partners, we try to build in the component of social protection and health within the larger problem statement of providing better livelihoods through access to capital. So yeah, I think all in all, it has been an interesting ride so far, and I'm just hoping that I will continue to learn the other side of things, the alternative side of finance, which is your blended finance, outcome based funding, to just
yeah.
traditional models of grant based funding that has happened all along in this sector. So
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. But I think while you were speaking, I was also thinking on my journey and reflecting on my journey, which I've done in the past as well. Even when you were talking about teaching in schools and doing that with Make a Difference and everything, I had a similar journey where I was teaching in schools with National Service Scheme and just working like visiting villages around the country in tribal areas and everything, to now having joined an organization where I'm working in strategy and I'm working with multiple state governments at the same time, working out of Delhi, I sometimes start to miss the whole on ground action and challenges, and just finding that purpose to be able to teach that kid. And given that you started with that whole purpose of being able to teach the kid or just deriving that happiness out of it, how do you sometimes feel about being able to create that impact at scale but not being able to be closer to the problem perhaps?
Right. Yeah, I think this is one of the questions that we, I think, often discuss, right? Like deepening the impact versus just going horizontally.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I feel like, I mean, as much as I would want to teach every kid that there is out there,
yeah,
I obviously have so much, capacity and time. So I
yeah,
often feel like, and I was of the same lens as you were just mentioning, right? Like I would love to do ground work and just spend quality time with whoever the participant, if it is a student or if it is an informal worker that I'm working with. I would just want to understand more about their lives, but they're just so much. I mean, I feel need versus the amount of resources that we have in the sector, that now I also feel if we're able to build those capacities within NGOs, grassroots NGOs, or community workers who are out there, I think that is also a considerable amount of value addition that we are doing. So if you are building a strategy for, say, 3 states, 200 schools, I mean, although you do not get to interact with the children of those 200 schools, you are really setting the fundamentals and the base strong for all of those 200 kids. Versus if you were to teach them all by yourself, it would take a considerable amount of time. So that's how I think I have shifted my viewpoint, and I think that kind of helps, because I think creating capacities at all levels, I think, is something that I've really learned along the way, and eventually you will have to like move away from solving for every little thing to looking at the bigger picture, and where do you think you can fit in and yeah, contribute rather.
that sounds fair, a very logical argument for that. So, Nayonika, I think a lot of questions and discussion about the kind of work that you have done and the kind of roles you have done. Uh, I know it's early in your career. It's just like a few years, and that's why we are talking to a early career professional in this particular episode of podcast, because I think everyone is going through the same churning of sorts of what to do, how to do. But at your end, what are the kind of reflections you have about these 2 years, now that you have spent these 2 to 3 years in the sector? What are your reflections, how you're thinking about your future in the sector? What how do you see the path ahead?
Right. Okay, that's a big one, I think.
Yeah,
But yeah, I think it's been really interesting to just understand impact from the lens of different institutions. I think the government looks at impact at a very different level
yeah,
and at scale, versus how a corporate or a philanthropic institution or even a non-profit would, right? So I think
yeah,
just understanding that in a with a little more context, I think that has been definitely something that I was looking up to, and I'm happy to say that in the last 2 years I've been
mhm,
able to kind of get a sense of that. And I'm just glad I made I took the plunge and I sort of stepped in to
yeah,
really
yeah,
understand it hands on. And also I think because everybody looks at impact in a different way, the way we measure impact today is also quite disaggregated, and I think this is a great opportunity for even tech to like step in, and it is stepping in. I mean, of course, like it was way more disaggregated before than it is today.
yeah,
So I think, like with like new focus on technology, then
mhm,
emphasis on outcome based funding, and then now we also have a social stock exchange. So I'm sure that things from here on are only going to get much more streamlined than things
mhm,
were over the last decade.
mhm,
So yeah, I think I'm just glad to be in the sector at this point in time, and
yeah,
to be a part of the solution rather than just dwelling about it or complaining about what's wrong in the
yeah,
society
yeah,
from the other side of the table. I think
yeah,
it's just been an
yeah,
interesting ride so far, and
yeah,
I hope to continue in the same sector for at least a few more years before again
yeah.
thinking about what next.
Yeah. But any thinking on like just the path ahead for the next 5 7 years while you're in the development sector? Are you planning a master's? Are you planning on getting a certain kind of experience while you're in the sector?
So I think the question of masters, I mean, I would be interested in, but the subject is something that I've honestly not quite narrowed down on, because I feel
Yeah,
like I'm just starting off on this in this sector, and it's just been 2 years.
yeah,
But I
yeah,
think two of the main things that I've been really intrigued by is, one is of course tech and governance. I think I've spoken a lot about that,
yeah.
just the opportunity
Yeah,
of it. And the second bit is, I think, social protection, which is essentially about people and families having security in the face of vulnerabilities and contingencies, and just having access to basic healthcare, and having a safe environment to work in. I think these are some very critical things, especially for blue collar workers, and that's the one of the segments that I've been closely working with over the last, I would say, 1.5 years. So I think I would definitely want to like just delve deeper into understanding what goes into making of these schemes, and just dispersing benefits of all the social protection schemes that exists out there for every
yeah, yeah,
yes, like every person out there. So yeah, I think because I feel social protection also gives poor people like a platform to step from just fighting for survival to working for a better tomorrow. So there's just so much scope, and there's just so much to learn. So I think, yeah, this is definitely one of the key areas that I want to venture more into.
wonderful, wonderful. And I think another question a lot of people have, even when I'm interacting with them who are in the corporate sector, is how do you switch? And given that you switched from the corporate sector, do you have any advice for people who are planning on switching from the corporate sector? How should they look at the policy sector? For example, you said that you didn't want to be in research and policy sector, you wanted to be at the implementation level and just grasp everything while you enter the policy sector. How should someone who has never been exposed to the policy sector go about, if you have any advice for them?
Right. Okay, so I don't think I should be the one giving advice here, but because I'm myself just evolving, I feel, as a
Yeah,
policy professional. But um, and also I feel like everybody's journey is unique, right? Like there's no
yeah,
one right or right age or right
mhm,
way to pivot or switch.
yeah,
But perhaps a few things that may help in deciding could possibly be that just really understand what social impact means to you, and that's like a very personal thing. And then speak to people from varied backgrounds who have made similar shifts, to just understand why they shifted into this sector, and what is the kind of impact, and does that resonate, I mean, remotely, even what you're expecting out of it, right? And sometimes I often see this, a lot of people are venturing out in the policy sector because they feel it's like really the cool thing to do. I mean, I hate to say this, but there are a lot of people who
yeah,
have been doing that as well. But I think being in the social impact sector is definitely not the only way you can have an impact on the world. So just having that straight, and just deciding that what is impact for you is like critical. Then I think the second thing that I would also request everybody to kind of just probably think about is, do you have any non-negotiables or preferences? That could be monetary, that could be non-monetary.
mhm,
And when I say non-monetary, it's mostly on, do you prefer structured problem statements, or do you prefer like, really broad, ambiguous? Are you like comfortable with broad, ambiguous, problem statements which may not have a lot of data points? So I think just thinking through what is it and what are those non-negotiables for you that you look for in a job, I think that also can help you make that switch or think about it. And
yeah,
then if you're really passionate towards the sector, then is your
yeah,
passion patient enough? Because as all of us have seen it in some form or the other, that change, especially systemic changes, are slow and they take time.
mhm,
And the last
yeah,
thing I'd want any of your listeners, or
yeah,
anybody for that matter, is to enter the sector only to step out disillusioned by the word impact, right? So I think really
yeah.
think through, because it's going to take some time before you see the impact, because the problem statements are huge and we are all collectively working towards it, but it's going to take a while before things get better. So yeah, just being patient.
Yeah. Oh, nice. Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. I think that sounds like a wonderful answer. And Thanks for that. Before we close the podcast today, would love to know what have you been reading recently, or if there you have any suggestions or any advice or any resources, books, whatever you would like to suggest to our listeners that they should read something that has impressed you recently.
Oh, yeah, sure. So I think there's this one book that I recently picked up and rather just finished is I'm sure a lot of you have heard of it. It's called Courage to be Disliked. And, this is all about like, how do you unlock the power within yourself to just become the most truest and I wouldn't say best, but the most truest self. And by doing just that, you can change your future and hope to find long lasting happiness. So I think, and this is also not a very conventional book where there's just somebody giving like a sermon of sorts or it's like a monologue, but rather it's a journey of a conversation between a very candid conversation between a psychologist and a indifferent youth who is very very open about what he thinks about life and at times is a cynic and there's this philosopher turned psychologist and
Wow,
who sort of
interesting.
responds to every question that comes in and it's a very candid conversation. So I think it's one of those books which will really leave you thinking after every chapter and definitely a recommended read that I would suggest if you have the time and the interest in these
Interesting.
kind of books. Yeah.
This is personally helpful for me. I've been trying to change my reading taste. I think I'll definitely put this in my wish list. But thank you so much. I think it's been a wonderful conversation. I personally learned a lot, and probably would have the chance to reflect upon a lot of things you said. And I'm sure it would be equally helpful to our listeners. And thanks again. It was a wonderful conversation.
Likewise, Ayush. Thank you so much for having me.